It was supposed to be a fresh start, a clean slate. After the slow, painful unraveling of a long relationship, I found myself standing in an empty townhouse in a quiet corner of southern Illinois. The year was 2023. The air was thick with the promise of summer. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my adult life. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was a heavy, unfamiliar blanket. In my old life, there was always noise, laughter, arguments, the low hum of a television. Here, there was only the sound of my own breathing. It was both a comfort and a curse. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? A place to heal, a place to be quiet. The townhouse was modest, one of a dozen identical brick buildings lining a sleepy cul-de-sac. It was the kind of street where you imagine children riding bicycles and neighbors sharing cups of sugar. It felt safe. It felt normal. I unpacked my boxes one by one, each object a relic from a past I was trying to leave behind. The process was slow, methodical. It gave me something to do, a way to fill the long, empty hours. I arranged my books on the shelves. I hung pictures on the walls. I was building a new life, brick by brick, right here in this quiet little town. The hope was that peace would find me here, that the turmoil inside would eventually match the serenity outside. But loneliness is a funny thing. It can creep in, even when you invite it. During the day, the sunlight would stream through the windows and I'd feel a sense of optimism. I could do this. I could be on my own. But then the sun would dip below the horizon and the shadows would grow long. The silence would return, deeper this time. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window seemed amplified. Was this the peace I had been searching for? Or was it something else entirely, a void waiting to be filled? I would sit on my small patio, a glass of iced tea in hand, and watch the world go dark, wondering if I had made the right choice. The neighborhood was a postcard of suburban tranquility. Manicured lawns, neatly trimmed hedges, cars parked precisely in their driveways. During my first week, I saw a few neighbors, a wave here, a polite nod there, a young family with a golden retriever, an elderly woman tending to her rose bushes. It was also perfectly pleasant. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. Or so you tell yourself. I was an outsider, a newcomer in this established little world. I just wanted to blend in, to become part of the scenery. I had no idea that someone was already watching me, making sure I never felt truly at home. The quiet was about to be broken. His name, I would later learn, was Mr. Abernathy. But for weeks, he was just a shape in the darkness, a silhouette. He lived in the townhouse on the corner, the one whose yard bordered the edge of the woods. I first saw him a few days after I moved in. It was late, close to midnight. I was locking my front door when I noticed him. He was standing on his lawn, perfectly still, facing my direction. He wasn't doing anything, not smoking, not looking at his phone, just standing there, staring. It was odd, I thought, but people have their quirks. I dismissed it, turned off the light, and went to bed, the image of the still figure lingering in my mind. But it wasn't a one-time thing. It became his ritual. Every night, without fail, he would be there. Sometimes he stood in his yard. Sometimes he stood at the edge of the street, right under the faint glow of the streetlight. He was a man of medium height, slender, with a shock of graying hair that was always unkempt. He wore the same thing every time, dark pants and a faded dark jacket, even on the warmest nights. He never moved. He never made a sound. He was just there. A silent sentinel guarding the entrance to my quiet new life. His presence began to feel less like a quirk and more like a performance. And I felt like I was the only one in the audience. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he enjoyed the night air. Maybe he was a writer, an artist seeking inspiration in the stillness. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my recent breakup had left me feeling vulnerable and on edge. The world can feel like a scary place when you're navigating it alone, but my gut told me something different. My gut told me this wasn't normal. The other neighbors seemed to ignore him, their curtains drawn tight, their doors securely locked. It was as if he was invisible to everyone but me. The sight of him became the unsettling end to every single day. The peace I had so desperately craved was being slowly eroded by this silent, nightly vigil. His gaze was the most unnerving part. Even from a distance I could feel it. It was vacant yet intense. It wasn't a curious glance. It felt possessive. It felt like he was watching his street, and I was the unwelcome intruder. I stopped sitting on my patio in the evenings. I started checking the locks on my doors and windows multiple times before going to bed. The simple act of taking out the trash at night became a mission filled with anxiety. I would scan the corner, my heart pounding, hoping he wasn't there. But he always was, a silent, unmoving statue whose presence screamed a warning I couldn't yet understand. A warning that my safe new home was anything but. The first real incident happened on a Tuesday, about a month after I moved in. The air was heavy and still, the kind of night that precedes a thunderstorm. I was in bed trying to lose myself in a book when I heard it. A sound from downstairs. A soft, scraping noise. It came from the back of the house, near the sliding glass door that led to my small patio. I froze, my book falling from my hands. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it the wind? An animal? I held my breath listening. Silence. I told myself I was imagining things. My nerves were shot. I was tired. I tried to go back to reading, but my eyes just scanned the same line over and over. Then it came again, louder this time. A distinct thump, followed by the unmistakable sound of the handle on the sliding door being jiggled. Vigorously. Someone was out there. Someone was trying to get in. Pure, cold terror washed over me. I was paralyzed for a moment, my mind racing. Who would be out there? Why? My thoughts immediately went to the man on the corner. The silent watcher. Was he done just watching? I slipped out of bed, my feet silent on the carpeted floor. I crept to my bedroom door, my hand shaking as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I dialed 911, my voice a choked whisper as I told the dispatcher that someone was trying to break into my house. The dispatcher was calm, professional. She told me to stay on the line, to lock myself in a room. Officers were on their way. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The rattling at the door stopped. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the calm voice of the woman on the phone. Was he gone? Or was he now trying another way in? Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like an approaching footstep. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, my back pressed against the door, imagining the worst. The silence that followed the noise was somehow more terrifying than the noise itself. It was a silence filled with possibility. When the police finally arrived, their flashing blue and red lights painting my walls, the relief was overwhelming. 2 officers did a sweep of the property. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no one hiding in the bushes. They were polite, but dismissive. "Probably just some kids, ma'am," one of them said. "Or maybe the wind." They suggested it might have been an animal. I tried to explain about the neighbor, the man who stands outside every night. They exchanged a look. "We know about Mr. Abernathy," the other officer said with a sigh. "He's a little strange, but he's harmless." Harmless. The word echoed in my ears as I watched them drive away, leaving me alone once more in the suffocating quiet. The police had called him harmless, but the nights that followed felt anything but. The fear didn't just disappear with the morning sun. It lingered. It was a constant, low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. I started seeing him not just at night, but during the day, too. A fleeting glimpse of his face in his window as I pulled out of my driveway. A shadow moving behind his curtains. It felt like I was being surveilled, my every move cataloged. Was I imagining it? Was the isolation making me paranoid? I tried to convince myself that was the case, but the feeling of being watched was too real, too persistent to be a product of my imagination alone. A few weeks after my 911 call, the intrusions became more tangible. Not as loud, but somehow more sinister. I had a small, wrought iron gate that led to my back patio. It wasn't much of a security feature, more decorative than anything, with a simple latch. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I noticed something odd. A small, smooth, gray stone was sitting directly on top of the latch. I hadn't put it there. It was deliberately placed, a tiny, unnatural detail in an otherwise familiar scene. It was a message. It said, "I was here, I can get this close." My blood ran cold. It was a quiet violation, a subtle way of reminding me that the barrier between us was meaningless to him. I called the police again. I know how it must have sounded. A hysterical woman calling about a rock on her gate. The officer who came out this time seemed even less interested than the last. He listened with a patient yet weary expression. He looked at the stone, he looked at me. "Ma'am, there's really nothing we can do about this," he explained, almost apologetically. "There's no crime here. He hasn't threatened you. He hasn't damaged your property." I tried to explain the context, the nightly watching, the rattling door, the feeling of being stalked. He just nodded and suggested I keep my doors locked. It was clear they saw me as the neighborhood nuisance, not him. The feeling of helplessness was crushing. I was living in a state of constant alert, yet the very people who were supposed to protect me saw nothing wrong. They saw a strange old man and an over-anxious woman. They didn't see the pattern. They didn't feel the escalating dread. After the police left, I threw the stone as far as I could into the woods behind my house. But I couldn't throw away the fear. The stone was a symbol. It was proof that he had been on my property, mere feet from my door, while I slept. The walls of my home, which were supposed to be my sanctuary, were beginning to feel like a cage, and the person holding the key was standing just across the street. The stone on the gate was a turning point. The police wouldn't help. My neighbors were oblivious. I was on my own. If I wanted to feel safe, I would have to take matters into my own hands. My fear was slowly being replaced by a grim determination. I would not be driven out. I would not live as a prisoner to this man's strange obsession. The first step was to reinforce my home. I spent a weekend installing new, heavier locks on all the doors. I bought dowel rods to jam into the tracks of the windows and the sliding glass door. Every turn of a screwdriver, every click of a new lock was a small victory against the growing dread. But locks and wooden rods could only do so much. They couldn't stop him from watching. They couldn't give me proof of his nightly trespassing. What I needed was evidence. What I needed was an eye that could see in the dark when I couldn't. The next weekend, I drove to a big box electronics store and bought a security camera. It was a simple, motion-activated camera with night vision. I felt a surge of empowerment as I stood on a stepladder, mounting it high on the back wall of my townhouse, angling it to cover the entire patio and the gate. This was my silent witness. This camera would see what I could only hear and feel. It would capture the truth. Setting up the camera was straightforward. I connected it to my Wi-Fi and downloaded the app to my phone. Now, I could watch a live feed of my own backyard from anywhere. That first night with the camera installed was different. I still felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but it was mixed with a sense of anticipation. I was no longer just a passive victim. I was fighting back. I lay in bed, my phone on the nightstand next to me, the app open. I watched the grainy black and white feed of my empty patio. The wind rustled the leaves. A moth fluttered in front of the lens. For hours, nothing happened. Maybe, just maybe, the sight of the camera had been enough to deter him. But around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A notification. Motion detected in backyard. My heart leaped into my throat. I sat up in bed, my hand trembling as I tapped the alert. The app opened to a recorded video clip. The timestamp was 2:13 a.m. At first, all I saw was the empty patio bathed in the eerie infrared glow. Then, from the right side of the screen, the gate slowly creaked open. A figure stepped through. It was him, Mr. Abernathy. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence as if he had done this 100 times before. The watcher was no longer content to stay on his own lawn. He was now officially a trespasser. The video was chilling. It was one thing to suspect, to fear. It was another thing to see it, to have undeniable black and white proof. In the clip, Mr. Abernathy walked silently across my small patio. He stopped at the sliding glass door, the very door he had rattled weeks before. He didn't touch it this time. He just stood there, his face turned towards the glass, his expression unreadable in the grainy night vision. He was looking into my home, looking for me. After a long, silent moment, he raised his hand and gently placed it flat against the glass, leaving a faint print. Then, as silently as he arrived, he turned, walked back to the gate, and disappeared into the darkness. Armed with this concrete evidence, I called the police the next morning. This time I thought they would have to listen. This time I had proof of a crime, trespassing. I showed the video to the 2 officers who responded. They watched the clip on my phone, their faces impassive. "Okay," one of them said. "We see him on your property." I waited for them to say what they would do next. Arrest him? Question him? At least issue a warning? But the response was dishearteningly familiar. "We'll go have a talk with him," the officer said. "We'll tell him to stay off your property." But since there's no damage and he didn't try to enter, a trespassing charge probably wouldn't stick. They went to his house. I watched from my window as they stood on his porch talking to him. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Mr. Abernathy just stood there, nodding. The officers left, and that was it. Nothing changed. In fact, it got worse. That night he was back in his usual spot, standing on the corner, watching. It felt like a defiance, a message that he was untouchable. The police talk had done nothing. The camera, my supposed protector, now felt like a tool for documenting my own torment. I became obsessed with it, checking the live feed constantly, my sleep shattered by motion alerts that were usually just a raccoon or a stray cat. The videos kept coming. Almost every other night my phone would buzz with a new recording. Sometimes he would just walk the perimeter of the patio. Other times he would bring small, strange objects and leave them by the gate. A dead flower, a piece of string tied in a knot, a bird feather. Each one felt like a threat, a twisted little gift. Each time I saved the video, I created a folder, a digital archive of his escalating harassment. I called the police a few more times, but each call was met with increasing impatience. They had their talk with him. In their eyes, the case was closed. I was alone, with my videos, my fear, and a neighbor who was growing bolder with every passing night. The constant vigilance was exhausting. It was a weight that I carried with me every moment of the day. My home, the place that was meant to be my sanctuary, had become the epicenter of my fear. I felt more like a warden than a resident, constantly monitoring the security feed, checking the locks, peering through the blinds. The simple joy of being home was gone, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The silence I once craved now felt menacing, a canvas for any strange noise my imagination could paint. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my bedroom doorknob, just like in the movies. It felt dramatic, but the fear was real enough to warrant it. My life began to shrink. I stopped inviting friends over. How could I explain the situation without sounding crazy? How could I ensure their safety when I couldn't even ensure my own? I would make excuses, claiming I was busy with work or not feeling well. The truth was, I was ashamed. Ashamed of my fear, and ashamed of my inability to solve the problem. The isolation I had chosen after my breakup became a forced confinement. I would come home from work, lock the door behind me, and not leave again until the next morning. The walls of my townhouse, once a symbol of my independence, now felt like they were closing in on me. The psychological toll was immense. I was jumpy, irritable, and perpetually tired. A car door slamming down the street would make my heart race. The phone ringing unexpectedly would send a jolt of panic through me. I felt like I was losing my mind, constantly questioning if I was overreacting. But then, I would look at the folder of videos on my phone and I would know. This was real. This was happening. The police's inaction made me feel completely powerless, as if my safety and peace of mind were irrelevant. I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be protected. The system I believed would be there for me had failed. I started to think about leaving. The thought felt like a defeat. I had poured so much hope into this little townhouse. It was supposed to be the place I rebuilt my life, but how could I build anything on a foundation of fear? I would look at real estate listings online, dreaming of an anonymous apartment building on a busy street, a place where I could disappear. But the financial reality of breaking a lease and moving again was daunting. I felt trapped, not just by my neighbor, but by my circumstances. I was stuck in a nightmare of my own making, and I couldn't see a way out. The final straw came on a cold, rainy morning in late autumn. The harassment had escalated from silent vigils and strange gifts to something far more direct, something that could not be ignored or explained away. I was running late for work, grabbing my keys and my bag in a rush. As I opened my front door, I saw it. Taped to the outside of the door, right at eye level, was a piece of notebook paper. It was wet from the overnight rain, the ink slightly blurred. But the message was sickeningly clear. Scrawled in messy block letters were 3 words: I see you. Time seemed to stop. I stood there in my doorway, the cold air washing over me, staring at the note. It was a confirmation of my worst fears. He wasn't just a harmless eccentric. He wasn't just a lonely old man. He was a threat. This was a direct, personal, and terrifying message. He had crossed the final line, moving from the back of my house to the very front door. He had stood right where I was standing now, taping his ugly words to my door. My hands trembled as I carefully peeled the damp paper off the wood. The police had said he hadn't threatened me. Well, here it was, a threat, plain and simple. I didn't even think. I just went back inside, locked the door, and called my landlord. My voice was shaking, but my resolve was firm. I'm breaking my lease, I said. I'm moving out. I don't feel safe here. I explained the entire situation from the very first night I saw him to the note I was now holding in my hand. To my surprise, my landlord was sympathetic. He sighed and said, "You're not the first person to have a problem with him." It was a stunning admission. He knew this man was a menace, and he had let me move in anyway. The anger I felt was hot and sharp, cutting through the fear. That same day, I started packing. There was no more hesitation, no more weighing the pros and cons. My safety was worth more than any broken lease penalty. I threw my belongings into boxes with a frantic energy. I didn't care about being neat. I just wanted to be gone. Every moment I spent in that house now felt like I was on borrowed time. I called a moving company and booked the first available slot. While I packed, I kept the blinds closed, my heart pounding at every sound from outside. The note had changed everything. It was no longer a question of if I should leave. It was a race to see how fast I could get away. 2 weeks later, a moving truck was parked in my driveway. The process of leaving was a blur of cardboard boxes and packing tape. I worked with a single-minded focus, eager to put this chapter of my life behind me. On the final day, as I did one last walkthrough of the empty townhouse, an eerie quiet had settled over the place. The rooms echoed with my footsteps. It looked just like it had the day I arrived, full of promise. But now, it was just an empty shell that housed months of fear and anxiety. I dropped the keys on the kitchen counter, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I drove away, watching the quiet little cul-de-sac disappear in my rearview mirror. I found a new apartment on the 3rd floor of a secure building in a different town. There were key fobs and intercoms and neighbors who I passed in the hallway with a polite hello and nothing more. The anonymity was a balm to my frayed nerves. For weeks I slept with the lights on. I would wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I heard a noise, my heart pounding. But slowly, very slowly, the feeling of safety began to return. I started to feel normal again. The experience had left a scar, a deep-seated mistrust that I knew would take a long time to fade. But I was out. I was safe. The nightmare, I thought, was finally over. About a month after I moved, I received an email. It was from my old landlord. He was forwarding a message from the new tenant, a young woman who had just moved into my old townhouse. My heart sank as I read her words. She was writing to the landlord to ask about the strange man on the corner. She wrote that he stood outside her house every night, just staring. She wrote that she was starting to feel scared and that she had found a small, smooth stone placed on her back gate that morning. She wanted to know if the landlord knew anything about him. She was at the beginning of the same terrifying story I had just escaped. I closed the email, a chill running down my spine. I had gotten out, but the threat hadn't gone away. It had just found a new target. Mr. Abernathy was still there, a permanent fixture in that quiet neighborhood, a ghost who wouldn't leave. He was still watching, still waiting, still ready to terrorize the next person who dared to move into the house across the street. And there was nothing anyone could or would do about it. The silence of that sleepy suburban street wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a community looking the other way. It was the sound of fear, waiting for its next victim. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it wouldn't be long before she too would be calling the police.